On this episode of This Week in Linux, we have a lot of new releases to talk about, from applications to distros to even some hardware news. GParted has finally reached the 1.0 milestone. Krita 4.2 and Zorin OS 15 were released this week. And some security news was released regarding the HiddenWasp Malware, so we'll talk about all of that. In hardware news, AMD announced their new Ryzen 3000 series CPU, and we also got some product updates from System76 and Dell. In Window Manager news, we got some updates from IceWM and HerbsluftWM. Later in the show, we'll discuss some Linux gaming news as Google announced a lot of news and structure and stuff for the Google Stadia service. Unity Tech announces the Unity editor is now available for Linux. And we'll take a look at an open source handheld console called PyGamer. All that and much more coming up. I'm Michael Tennell with Tux Digital, and this is your weekly source for Linux GNews. This episode of This Week in Linux is sponsored by DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean offers the simplest, most developer-friendly cloud platform. It's optimized to make managing and scaling apps easy with an intuitive API, multiple storage options, integrated firewalls, load balancers, and more. You can get access to this, plus their world-class customer support for as low as $5 per month. DigitalOcean also has 2,000 cloud-agnostic tutorials to help you stay up to date with the latest open-source software, languages, and frameworks. You can get started on DigitalOcean for 30 days for free with a $50 credit by going to do.co/tux. That's do.co/tux. Again, you can get started on DigitalOcean with that $50 credit by going to do.co/tux. And thanks again to DigitalOcean for sponsoring This Week in Linux. Before we get started with the show, I just want to let you know that I will be at the Southeast LinuxFest this week. It's just in a couple of days, and it's going to be in Charlotte, North Carolina. So if you're in the area, it is definitely going to be a fun conference to go to, so be sure to do that if you are available to. This is going to be my second year at SELF, and it'll be my first year to give 2 talks at SELF. Last year I gave 1 talk, and it didn't really work out that well. This year I'll be giving 2 talks, so I can I can double the chances of doing a successful talk. Anyway, I do plan on doing an episode of This Week in Linux while if not while I'm there, at least publishing it while I'm there, or getting one done when I'm on the way back or whatever. I hope to have one still, even though I won't be at my setup. I still want to try to do something like that. So, be sure to stick around and subscribe if you haven't. But there's a lot of stuff we're going to be doing at the SELF this year. We're going to be doing a live episode of Destination Linux, and that will be all 4 of the hosts of Destination Linux, including myself, are going to be at this SELF this year. So that is going to be awesome. And we're also going to do some live streaming. I'll be doing maybe like some vlogging or something, or some occasional random live streams. So be sure to follow me on Twitter and Mastodon to get information about that. Also, if you subscribe and ring the bell for notifications on YouTube, that should also help and work to get notified. But I will be posting on Twitter and Mastodon when I go live, or when I'm about to go live anyway. So if you want to follow on that'll be probably the easiest way to guarantee it, because YouTube, you never know really with them. But so there's also going to be some streaming in general for the Southeast Linux has their own. They have their own stream. And we're going to be participating in that streaming periodically. We're going to be probably guest hosting here and there between talks and that kind of thing. So if you want to be a remote attendee for Southeast Linux Fest, that would be a good option for that, because that's how you get the stream. There's a full stream that you can have where you can stream every talk, or most every talk, I think every talk. And then the other stream is like the free stream that anybody can go to, and that is like an all-day thing that they pick and choose which talks to show and all kinds of stuff. It's going to be a really interesting conference, so I look forward to it, and I hope to see you there. If you are going to the conference, please let me know. Please, feel free to stop me in the hallway and introduce yourself. I always love meeting new people, so don't hesitate to do that. And I look forward to meeting you, and I look forward to, just the conference itself and seeing how it goes. And hopefully I don't, create a disaster with my talks again. Technically I didn't create it. It was just circumstances and technical difficulties and all that other stuff. But hopefully this year I get past at least one of them smoothly. Oh, I will also be recording those talks myself, and I will be uploading them to this channel. So if you want to check those out, If you're not aware, I'm doing 2 talks. One is Kden Live, advanced techniques and stuff like that, and the other one is open source marketing do's, don'ts, and how-tos. So that will be also uploaded to this channel. So if you have not subscribed, be sure to do so, because I think it is definitely going to be worth it. So I'll see you itself if you're there, and otherwise I'll see you in like 20 seconds when we start the rest of the show, because there's still a show to do. Maybe not 20 seconds, a little less than that. Up first in the show this week is GParted 1.0 has been released. Now, GPart has been around for 14 years now, and they've just now released 1.0. And I know that seems really weird, and I would agree that that is really weird. However, it's not necessarily that they're changing it because there's a huge major change to the overall infrastructure of the software or anything like that. There are some significant changes to this particular release, but it's not like a huge change based on the version number. It's just they decided that it's time to turn it into a 1.0 release cycle. I don't know why they took so long to do so, because it's been one of the most popular partitioning tools for well over a decade. So in general, if you are a part of a project or someone is, and they have spent a long time and they still haven't released a 1.0, it's probably a good idea to do that, because a lot of people kind of misunderstand that something is 0 point something as a beta or as not available for people to use. So it's good that they finally have done it to change it to 1.0, but most projects, if it's in beta, feel free to keep it at that 0 point whatever. But if it isn't, it's a good idea to update that naming or that versioning scheme. So anyway, with this particular release of GParted, actually changes a lot of stuff that are significant in the sense of improvements to the overall usage of GParted. For example, they have now ported it to GTK 3, which it was using GTK 2 for that entire time. For not entire time, but for the most part. And they've also added support for F2FS for the read disk usage, grow, and check for those file systems. You can. They've actually fixed some slow refreshing issues with the NTFS file systems, and they've also improved the boot menu for UEFI and some others. So this is actually a pretty good release, and it's a really good project, and it's been around for quite a while. So if you need a partitioning system, especially if you wanted to have a live ISO for partitioning, this is one of the best options for that. And congratulations to the 1.0 release for GParted. It has been a long time in the making. So if you'd like to learn more about GParted 1.0, I'll have a link to it in the show notes. So some really good news for Team Red and fans of Team Red. AMD has announced that the Ryzen 3000 series is coming soon. Actually, it's coming in with less than a month now. And AMD has put their competition on notice at Computex this year, with an impressive lineup for the Ryzen 3000 CPUs and GPUs. On the GPU front, AMD announced the first Navi lineup based on the 7nm architecture, which will be direct competitor to NVIDIA's 2070, and with as much as 10% performance boost over the 2070 line. The CPU lineup was even more impressive. Actually, it's ridiculously impressive with the 3700X, the 3800X, and the Ryzen 9 3900X. In fact, the Ryzen 9 3900X comes with 12 cores and 24 threads, and it has a base clock of 3.8 gigahertz with a boost clock of 4.6 gigahertz. And it also has a ridiculous 70 megabytes of cache. It only requires 105 watts as well. When you compare that to the Intel's closest competitor, which was the i9 9920X at 165 watts. So you have it uses less wattage. It has, in many cases, it's significantly better performance, and is also ridiculously better priced. So AMD basically dropped the mic with the price of the Ryzen 9 with the 3900X. So you can get that CPU for just $499. When you compare that to the i9 9920X that I just talked about, which is $1,100. So $499, $1,100. That's a pretty good deal considering it's also got improvements like the overall, like it's better wattage, it's better performance in many cases. Overall, it's just ridiculously impressive, all the stuff that they're releasing. It's actually kind of funny because there used to be a time period where AMD was known as the overheating, the overheating hardware. So that if you wanted to have better heat in your house, you would just get an AMD. And at this point, based on the fact that they have less wattage, better performance, and ridiculously cheaper price, it's kind of like flipped it completely. And now Intel is at that is the focus of that joke now, in my opinion. That's kind of funny. So anyway, really, AMD's CEO Lisa Su's leadership continues to show that AMD leaps and bounds above where they were just a few short years ago. And their innovation in consumer-friendly prices has them now raising the bar for all other competitors in this space. So I'm also really excited about this particular release because it means not only is the Ryzen 3000 series a ridiculously powerful hardware and has really good value for its competitors, it also means that the 2700X from last year is going to be discounted. And I am looking forward to doing that because I don't necessarily need the latest and greatest. I would like to have latest and greatest, but I'm okay with the 2700X because it's also a beast CPU. So I'm probably going to check that out because it just means that there's going to be a lot of discounts on the second-hand version. So, there's many ways to look at this being awesome. So if you'd like to learn more about this particular release from AMD, I'll have a link to their blog post in the show notes. Back at GDC 2019, Google unveiled Stadia as their cloud gaming service powered by Linux, AMD, and Vulkan API. Now, recently, Google has announced through the Stadia Connect YouTube channel the pricing and structure for Google Stadia as a service. So the highlights of the Stadia stuff the Stadia event that they did recently, was that you can get you can get 4K at 60 frames HDR playback with 5.1 surround sound with just having a 35 megabyte or megabit download connection, which is pretty impressive considering what that means. It implies that the compression for the data and the feed is ridiculously impressive at that point, if that's true. Also, it says that if you can get a minimum of anywhere between a 1080p, 720p and 1080p, somewhere around there, with the 10 megabits per connection speed, if that's what you want, because that's ridiculously small also for that. So it might mean that for if you wanted to do 720p, maybe 1080p, even a DSL connection would work. But anything beyond that you're going to need something more powerful. But it's interesting because there's some things that Stadia is doing that is not ideal, because when it was first launched, people were talking about how this would be really cool if they're doing Netflix for gaming, and the fact that you'd be able to just start playing a game whenever you want, and you pay a monthly fee for that. Now, there is going to be a monthly fee in that it's called Stadia Pro, and it will be available at $9.99 per month for the highest quality of 4K gaming. But that doesn't mean that you're going to be able to play all the games. Most games will be available to buy as opposed to rent versus that flat monthly fee thing. So yes, there will be some games that will be available for free to play with the subscription account, but you'd actually have to buy some games in order to play them on Stadia. So it implies that you have to buy the subscription and pay for the game, but you don't own that game because it's still on a Stadia server. So you still have to pay the monthly fee in order to access that game, which is really weird. Now, they did say that you can get the free version of Google Stadia. That is going to be a thing sometime next year. I mean, you actually have to buy the games if you want to use a free account. But if technically you had the Stadia Pro and then stopped using it, stopped paying for it, you can still play the games that you did, but you still require their service to get those games. You can't just transition it to Steam or whatever. So it's kind of weird because it still requires you to have an internet connection to play the game. You still have to pay the fee, and they haven't given the price about what these games might cost, but I doubt they're going to be very discounted at all, if any. But they also announced they're going to do this Stadia Founder Edition stuff, where you can get like a custom controller, a limited edition Stadia controller with a Chromecast Ultra and 3 months of Stadia Pro service. It's kind of hard for me to decide which one I want to do. You know, what position I want to take. Because one, as a gamer, I really want to check out this service because it's really interesting especially for the idea of having these games available on Linux through this service. And it could be that having support for these games on Stadia might make it easier for these companies to support Linux in general, which would be a good thing overall. Even if the service is not something I want to use, it could still benefit Linux, and that's why it's on this show. But at the same time, it's Google, and I don't trust Google at all because they've proven they're not trustworthy. So, you know, it's a mixed feelings about this. One, I think it's a cool concept. I think the technology is really interesting and impressive, especially if that compression system that claim is accurate. And I think it's really interesting in the fact that you don't have to download the games, or you don't have to, you can get access whenever you want. That's kind of cool. But at the same time, it's Google. So, yeah. Anyway, if you'd like to learn more about this, I'll have a link to the video that they released on YouTube in the show notes below. Up next in the show, Zorin OS 15 has been released. Now, this is the 15th version of their distro, but you might be, if you're aware of Zorin OS, you might be wondering, like, wasn't the last one version 12? And technically, yes. They've decided to bump it up to 15 instead of going to like 13 or 14 because in the very early days of Zorin, they actually had a different versioning scheme, so that they technically have this released 15 times, or 15 new releases. So this would be the 15th, and they just decided to change it to just turn the version into the amount of times they've released. So that's a perfectly reasonable reason to change it to that. But if you were wondering, the 12 to 15, that's why. And Zorin 15 is based on Ubuntu 18.04.2 LTS version. And it's really interesting, a lot of the things they're doing, like how they're customizing GNOME and all kinds of stuff. And we actually had a conversation with Artyom from Zorin and on episode 65 of Destination Linux. So you can go check that out if you want to learn more about the operating system and how they got involved in Linux and everything. It's really, really interesting. I'll have a link to the Destination Linux episode in the show notes. But if you want to go to it right now, destinationlinux.org/episode-65. So Zorin 15 introduces a lot of interesting things, like the Zorin Connect is based on GS Connect combination with that and KDE Connect. It's like an interesting approach because the way that they've rebranded the KDE Connect app on Android, as well as the stuff inside of the shell, to kind of be more cohesive with the rest of the experience. So that's pretty interesting because, I mean, of course, it's totally fine to do that because it's open source and everything. I just thought it was kind of interesting that they chose to make their own custom approach rather than, not custom approach, but custom branding to make it easy for their users to find what they need to do. You just call it Zorin Connect and on both sides, and then there you go. Whereas with the GS Connect, you actually have to go to your Android and install KDE Connect to get it to work. So that might be confusing to some people. But if you're not aware, KDE Connect is awesome, and I'm going to do a video about that because it deserves it. So, moving on, they've actually improved some performance using the latest GNOME shell. Actually, I think they're using GNOME.30, but they also upgraded the kernel for 4.18. And they're using the hardware enablement stack from Ubuntu, so they're going to get more updates as soon as those are available. So at some point, the 5.0 kernel will be available through the hardware enablement stack, and then Zorin will be able to utilize that as well. Now, they've actually done a lot of interesting things. Is like they've modified their shell. Like if you haven't seen it, it's really interesting the way they do it because Zorin OS is GNOME shell based, but it looks nothing like GNOME shell. I mean, it's massively modified. It looks more like a Windows 10 GNOME shell merged thing. So if you wanted a distro option for someone who's coming from Windows, this might be something to show them. It's a really interesting idea. I'm kind of curious why they chose GNOME to do this rather than just any of the other DEs that already have more of a paradigm with Windows. But it is pretty interesting, and they've also got a lot of customization stuff where they have an auto theme switch so that it switches to desktop into dark mode at sunset and back to light mode after sunrise. So it automatically does the, instead of doing the removing blue light or red shift kind of thing, it just changes the desktop theme automatically based on the time of the day. So that's pretty cool. They've also done it where they've set up Flatpak support built into the OS, as well as added a do not disturb mode, which is pretty nice. So Zorin OS comes in multiple editions as well, so you can hit the Ultimate, Core, Lite, and the Education version. The Core version is free. The other versions are paid, and they come with additional features and different pre-installed stuff, like pre-installed apps for convenience and things like that. If you'd like to learn more about Zorin OS, I'll have a link to both the Destination Linux interview as well as the link to this release in the show notes below. Up next in the show is Krita 4.2. Krita 4.2 is recently released, and if you are familiar with the show, you're probably aware that I'm a KDE fan, and one of the reasons I am is because of things like this. KDE makes an application, Krita, that is awesome. They make a lot of other great things too, but Krita is a ridiculously good painting software for Linux. It allows you to do vector graphics and use drawing tablets and all kinds of stuff. It is an impressive piece of software. And this version improves support for multi-monitors, also adds more support for different drawing tablets, and improved overall performance of the application. It also features support for viewing and animating of HDR images, which is pretty cool. And in this latest version, they've added some new blend modes, some give you the ability to undo multiple moves in a row. They've improved the selections for moving, rotating, and transforming selections. They've made it possible to resize thumbnails, improvements to the flow and opacity, sharpness, and opaque options inside of the editor. You can now do a copy translate mode that lets users specify multiple cursors on the screen simultaneously for painting and drawing, which is really, really cool. So if you're interested in checking out more about this, Krita is really cool. It's really fantastic and definitely worth checking out. So Krita 4.2 is linked in the show notes. Up next in the show is a couple of window manager news updates. And first we're going to start off with HerbsluftWM. Our HerbsluftWM 0.7.2 has been released recently. There's not a lot of information about what is new about this particular release. They didn't really provide that much information, so if you'd like to learn more, you're going to have to kind of dig in yourself. I'll have a link to all of it in the show notes, but as far as their main site and the source code for the latest release, if you're interested in checking that out. But HerbsluftWM is a manual tiling window manager for X11 using Xlib and Glib. Now it's manual because some tiling window managers are more automatic loading, so it chooses where to put things, and this is more giving you more control of how you handle those things. So the layout is based on splitting frames into subframes, which can then be split multiple times, and then allowing you to put windows inside of those subframes. So it's pretty interesting because you can have you can have tiling that's not like the standard of grid styling. You can set up the tiling to be a specific style of setup per monitor even. That's one of the interesting things of how they do it, because the tags system, they call it a tag system, but it's really more like a workspace and virtual desktop thing. They just call it tags. These are actually set up to be working on independently on each monitor. So if you have multiple monitors and you have multiple workspaces, essentially, you can have them separated in not working exact same way on each monitor. You can have, or same monitors, you can have them separate so that each monitor has its own style of layout, depending on what all that you want to display. So it's a pretty interesting approach. And they also have a really high portability aspect to it, where they have the configuration of the IPC calls from their client to use a configuration file that is basically just a script that runs on startup when you boot your computer, which makes it really portable, so you can move that configuration file to however many computers you want to use it on really easily. So that's pretty interesting. And if you'd like to learn more about HerbsluftWM, I'll have a link in the show notes below. And by the way, I say HerbsluftWM, not WM, because it's a German word, or a German project, and the name is German, so the pronunciation is VM. And they asked me to do that when I talked to them a long time ago about making a how to pronounce video about this project. I haven't got to that yet, but I did find out that's what they prefer. So a sneaky episode of How to Pronounce is included in this particular episode of This Week in Linux. So there you go. HerbsluftWM. I have a link to it in the show notes. Up next in the show is the other window manager we're going to talk about this week, and that is IceWM. 1.5.5 has been released, and like many other window managers, IceWM focuses on speed and simplicity and, getting out of the way of the user. But this latest release has some interesting stuff they've added. They've added some new hotkeys, they've added a new quick switch system, and they've also made it possible or improved the behavior of focusing on which workspace that you want to be actively using. And if you haven't heard of it before, IceWM is not a tiling window manager like the previous one. It is more of a traditional window manager, but still not exactly traditional in the sense that it's more similar to OpenBox than it is other things because of how it's a floating window manager structure. And they've got a lot of interesting aspects to it because they have a taskbar built into it, unlike OpenBox. So they've done some things where it's more of a combination of trying to be as lean as possible while still having the conveniences of a full system or a full desktop environment, but not exactly. Their focus is not to be a desktop environment. It's just having some extra stuff like the taskbar optional situation, or having Alt-Tab to do window switching and that sort of thing built into the structure. And they also have multiple workspaces, and you can, one of the things that I like about it is that it's fully usable via the keyboard, so you don't even have to use the mouse. It's really highly navigatable through the keyboard, similar to how tiling window managers are. This is kind of like that, although it is very specific of how the keyboard navigation works, so you'd have to kind of get used to that and learn the process. But overall, it's pretty interesting window manager. If you're interested in checking out, a variety of different window managers, this is definitely one to put on your list. So if you'd like to learn more about this particular release of 1.5.5 of IceWM, I'll have a link to it in the show notes. Up next in the show, the Snap Store is now available as a snap. Well, not now available. It's been around for a few months or so, about 6 months, I think. And, I haven't talked about it on this show before because I wasn't aware of it until recently. So I decided I'm going to go ahead and include it in the episode because it is definitely interesting and worth checking out if you are using snaps. Because the Snap Store is a fork of GNOME software that features snaps and only snaps. And this store also features tools that let you switch the snap channels of an app, to adjust the app permissions, and you can read and submit app reviews. So it's really interesting that they did this because it allows you to install snaps more easily rather than going to the Snap Store on the website, copying the code to install it through the command line. You can just copy the code for the command line once on the Snap Store and then just install everything from the Snap Store at that point. So it makes finding snaps a snap. So if you want to check out the Snap Store, I'll have a link to it in the show notes below. Up next in the show is a celebration of sorts. I'd like to tip my hat to the people behind DistroWatch and Phoronix. Happy birthday to both the DistroWatch and Phoronix team. DistroWatch has been around for 18 years, and Phoronix is now celebrating their 15th year of existence, so that's awesome. I mean, you've been doing stuff for so long that I've been, keeping up to date with various different distro releases and news updates for hardware, and all the testing and benchmarking. Phoronix has had the benchmarking Phoronix suite for 11 years now, so that's really cool. And there's so much information that both of these sites provide, and I just wanted to say thanks for all the stuff that you do, and wish well for many years to come. And yeah, so happy birthday to DistroWatch and Phoronix. Up next in the show is some security news. A new malware has been discovered, and it's targeting Linux users. It's called HiddenWasp. So probably the scariest thing about this particular malware is that it has zero detection rate in all of the major antivirus systems, and also it seems to be doing things that can stay around longer even if you remove the malware itself. So this particular malware isn't just crypto mining or DDoSing machines or anything. Rather, its goal seems to be targeting for remote control of the systems. This malware was discovered by the Intezer. I'm not sure how to say it, but Intezer, and they're stating it adopted a lot of its code from publicly available rootkits like Mirai and Azazel. The infection process involves the creation of a new user account, like over SFTP, which likely allows the hackers to access the system even if HiddenWasp has been removed. And the only prevention published at this time is to block command and control IP addresses detailed in the IOC section. So the Intezer people say, in order to check if your system is infected, you can search for ld.so files, and if any of these files do not contain the string etc or etc/ld.so.preload, then your system might be compromised. So you want to check. If you want to check it, you should do that. I'll have a link to the blog post as well as what to do in the show notes below as far as checking, see if you're infected. More than likely, you're not going to be, because we don't actually know what the attack vector is for HiddenWasp. It seems, though, that it doesn't have an attack vector. It seems like it needs to have another method of getting into that system, and then once you have access to the system, then they would deploy it as a malware deployment rather than it having its own attack vector. So more than likely, it's not as big a deal as it's been made out to be, having its own branded name for the malware. But it's still something that is potentially bad for sure because of what kind of control it gives you. But it seems to need a separate attack vector in order to deploy it. So a hacker would need to break into your system in another way and then deploy this in order to infect you. So as long as your system is kept up to date and you install the security patches and everything like that, you should be good to go for the most part. But if you want to check your system anyway, it's probably a good idea. So I'll have a link to the HiddenWasp blog post in the show notes if you'd like to learn more, and if you'd like to run the test to see if you have an issue like that. Up next in the show is some more hardware news from Dell and System76. So up first, we're going to talk about System76's latest update for the refreshed Gazelle Linux laptop. It's going to be coming with an NVIDIA GTX 16 series GPU, and this actually is going to be powered by the 9th gen Intel Core i7s and have options of up to 64 gigs of RAM, 8 terabytes of storage, 15-inch or 17-inch screens, and a choice between the NVIDIA GTX 1650 or 1660 Ti GPUs. System76 had this to say that NVIDIA graphics are back on the Gazelle after a long hiatus, and we couldn't be more excited. Just like on the Oryx Pros, users can now switch between Intel and NVIDIA graphics using a toggle in Pop! OS. So the Gazelle is going to have the similar thing that the Oryx Pro had, where you have the switch back and forth between which hardware is being used through the Optimus switching stuff. So that is really cool, and that's one of the reasons why Pop! OS is an interesting distro to check out, because they take that into consideration, and they also have AMD versions of the Pop! OS. So if you have that particular hardware, that's going to have a setup well for that particular structure. So that's really interesting. So if you haven't checked out Pop! OS or System76, you might want to check those out. This latest laptop I don't think is available yet, but will be available pretty soon. And Dell has announced that there's new precision laptops, and these precision laptops are now available right now. And there are 3 models, including the Precision 5540, 7540, 7740, and these offer 15-inch screens and 17-inch screens. Actually, I think there's not, just depending on which one you get, that's what screen you get. You don't have a choice between the actual thing. But so like if you get the 5540 or the 7540, those are 15-inch screens, and then 7740 is a 17-inch screen. So all 3 laptops offer a range of Intel Core and Xeon processors, and they can users can choose between NVIDIA Quadro or Radeon Pro GPUs. So that's pretty cool, being able to have the option for AMD GPUs. I kind of wish they had also a AMD CPU for their laptops, but I'm sure that's coming in the future, because AMD is doing so much recently that they've also started doing stuff for their the mobile line. So more than likely that's going to come out pretty soon. I hope to see laptop companies making AMD based stuff, because as a fan of open source, I want to see that more often. Anyway, if you'd like to learn more about Dell's lineup of their latest laptops, I'll have a link to them in the show notes below, as well as the System76 information from their blog post about the new Gazelle in the show notes below. Up next in the show is the PyGamer, some Linux gaming hardware news now. And so gamers have had the ability to use a variety of different handheld devices over the years for Game Boy, PS Vita, the Nintendo Switch now. But what about open source gamers? Well, Adafruit has answered the call for a portable open source gaming device called PyGamer. This device is actually pretty reasonably priced too, at $39.95. It comes with a micro SD card slot for storing information about the games and games themselves, I assume. A 1.8 inch color TFT display is connected to its own SPI port, so it's built into the actual device. That also has an analog thumbstick that has X and Y analog inputs, which is really nice because it gives like a modern feel rather than like the old D-pad style. So that's cool. And it also has a triple axis accelerometer or motion sensor. It has 4 game control buttons with square tops so that you can customize it if you wanted to put little extra caps on it. You can also use the stereo headphone jack, which is also called the Courage jack these days. And it also has a USB port for both battery charging and also programming and debugging the device as well. So this is pretty cool. I think this is definitely worth checking out if you're a Linux gamer. And I might pick one up just to have like some content for the show because it seems like it'd be really fun to play with. So yeah, the PyGamer, if you'd like to learn more about this, I'll have a link to it in the show notes. And finally this week, Unity Tech announces that the Unity editor is now officially available for Linux. Now, this has actually been around for a little while in an experimental mode or beta mode, but they've actually now officially announced that it is ready for game development on Linux. The Unity game engine has been available on Linux for quite a while, so there's a lot of games that I play that use the Unity engine, like Golf with Friends and some other ones. So there's a lot that are already using the game engine, but they had to develop it on a different platform, and now they can use the Linux platform to develop these games now through the Unity engine, Unity editor now being on Linux. So that is awesome. And yeah, if you'd like to learn more about this particular news, I'll have a link to the blog post from Unity in the show notes below. Thanks for watching this episode of This Week in Linux. If you like what I do here on this show, please like that smash button and be sure to subscribe. If you'd like to support the Tux Digital channel, we have multiple ways to contribute via sponsors, Patreon, PayPal, and many others. You can learn more by going to tuxdigital.com/contribute. Or you can order the Linux is Everywhere t-shirt by going to tuxdigital.com/LinuxIsEverywhere. Or if you're in Europe, you can go to tuxdigital.com/LinuxEverywhereEU for shipping inside of Europe. I really need to make a simpler thing like /store or something. That's coming soon, hopefully. We also have ways to contribute without any cost to you by using our affiliate links. You can find links for places like Amazon, Private Internet Access, and many more by going to tuxdigital.com/affiliates. If you'd like to submit some good news to the show, then visit the subreddit at thisweekinlinux.reddit.com. If you'd like some more podcasting goodness from me, then check out the latest episode of Destination Linux, as I'm a co-host of that show. And just a reminder, the show is live usually every Saturday, so join us in the live chat room to discuss all the latest Linux news each week. It wasn't live this week, but next week also won't be live because I'll be at Self, so the week after that it will be live. So there's that. Anyway, thanks again for watching. I'm Michael Tennell with Tux Digital, and as always, keep using, learning, and enjoying Linux.